Hey guys, welcome back to more Entitled People stories. In this video, an entitled neighbor built an illegal garage on my vacant land, claiming he had permission to do it. Let's dive right into the story. So I am Jim, 47, and I've lived in my current home for about 15 years. When my great uncle passed away 5 years ago, he left me a decent-sized vacant lot right next to my property. It was an unexpected inheritance, but I was grateful for it. I had dreams of turning it into something special, maybe a community garden or a small orchard where the neighborhood kids could learn about growing their own food. But between work and life's other commitments, I had not gotten around to starting that project yet. One thing about me, I am what you might call methodical. My wife jokes that I should have been an accountant instead of an IT project manager because I keep records of everything. The day I inherited that lot, I had it professionally surveyed and kept all the documentation in a neat folder in my home office. I even have the survey map framed on my wall, something that would later prove to be incredibly valuable. Well, enter Brenda, and by the way, ripe stars, I changed the names for privacy reasons, my next door neighbor. She moved in about 2 years ago after her divorce, driving a shiny new Mercedes SUV that seemed a bit too flashy for our modest suburban neighborhood. At first, she seemed nice enough, always waving and making small talk about her landscaping plans, but there was something off about her friendliness. It started with little things. I'd noticed her trash can creeping over onto my vacant lot, and then her dog would be running around on my property, leaving presents I definitely did not want to find while mowing. Each time I would politely mention it to her. "Oh Jim, don't be such a stickler." She laughed it off. "What's a few feet between neighbors?" I remembered one particular conversation from about 6 months ago. "Brenda, I noticed your dog's been digging holes on my lot again, trying to keep things neighborly." She rolled her eyes, still smiling. "Oh come on Jim, it's not like you're using the land for anything. Besides, Scout needs his exercise." "I understand, but it's still my property. I would appreciate it if you could keep him in your yard." "Fine, fine," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You know, that empty lot really brings down your property values. You should consider selling it to me. I would give you a fair price." I declined politely, explaining my future plans for the space. She did not seem pleased, but I thought that was the end of it, but boy, was I wrong. So last month I had to go on a 2-week business trip to Chicago. Everything was normal when I left. My vacant lot was just as empty as always, freshly mowed before my departure. But when I returned, well, that's when things got interesting. I remember pulling into my driveway late Sunday evening, tired from the flight, when something caught my eye. Even in the dim evening light, I could see it, a half-built structure standing proudly and illegally on my vacant lot. The wooden frame was up and building materials were scattered everywhere, like some kind of construction side yard sale. I blinked hard, wondering if jet lag was making me hallucinate, but no, there was definitely the beginning of a garage taking shape on my property, at least 3 feet over the property line. I barely slept that night, reviewing my property documents and taking photos of everything I could see from my property, and first thing Monday morning, I went over to Brenda's house and rang the doorbell. She answered wearing designer workout clothes, looking like she had just finished a session with her personal trainer. "Oh Jim, you're back. How was your trip?" "Brenda," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk about the construction on my property." She beamed. "Isn't it gorgeous?" "It's going to be a 3-car garage with a little workshop area. The contractors have been doing such a wonderful job." I pulled out my survey map and said, "The problem is you're building on my land. The property line is here." I pointed to the marker, "and your garage is clearly 3 feet over it." Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. Those old surveys are never accurate. Besides, I'm doing you a favor. This will increase both our property values. I will even give you $5,000 for the inconvenience. That's more than generous for a few feet of unused land." I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I maintained my composure. "Brenda, did you even get permits for this construction?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Of course I did. Everything is perfectly legal. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a Pilates class to get to." Before she could close the door, I said firmly, "I'm gonna need you to stop construction immediately and remove what's already been built from my property." She laughed, actually laughed in my face. "Oh, what Jim? Are you gonna sue me? Over 3 feet of land you're not even using? Don't be petty." As she closed the door, I stood there for a moment, taking deep breaths. Then I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to the city's building department and then to a real estate attorney. The city's building department turned out to be very interested in Brenda's project, as I suspected she had not filed for any permits. Not a single one. The building inspector, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, came out the very next day. I was working from home and watched through my office window as Patricia methodically documented everything. Brenda came rushing out of her house when she noticed the inspection taking place, still wearing her designer workout gear. "What's going on here?" I heard Brenda demand through my partially open window. Patricia barely looked up from her tablet. "Ma'am, I'm conducting an inspection of this unauthorized construction. Are you the property owner?" "Yeah, this is my property and I don't appreciate—" "Could you show me your building permits, please?" "They're inside." "I will have to look for them." "Ma'am, our records show that no permits were issued for this address or the adjacent lot." I couldn't help but smile as I watched Brenda's confident demeanor crumble. "There must be some mistake. My contractor assured me." "Who's your contractor?" Patricia interrupted, pen poised over her notepad. Brenda's face reddened. "Well, I would have to check my records." "You don't know the name of your contractor?" Patricia's eyebrow rose skeptically. "Listen," Brenda's voice took on that familiar condescending tone. "I'm sure we can work something out here. This is just a small misunderstanding." Patricia closed her tablet case with a snap. "Ma'am, I'm issuing an immediate stop work order. All construction must cease until proper permits are obtained and," she emphasized this part, "you provide documentation proving that you have the legal right to build on this property. Any continuation of work will result in daily fines." She posted a stop work order right on the partial frame of the garage. Brenda looked like she had swallowed a lemon. That afternoon I got a text from Brenda saying, "Really, Jim? Calling the building inspector? So petty. Let's talk about this like adults." I wrote back, "Happy to meet with you and our respective lawyers to discuss the removal of the structure." She showed up at my door 20 minutes later saying, "Look," trying to sound reasonable, "I know I should have asked first. But what's done is done. How about I give you 10,000 for the land? That's more than it's worth." I shook my head. "The land is not for sale, Brenda, and even if it was, it's worth far more than that. You need to remove the structure." "Remove it? Do you know how much I've already spent?" Her voice rose an octave. "I cannot just tear it down. What about my contractor's fees?" "The contractor you cannot even name?" I could not help asking. Her face flushed. "This is ridiculous." "I will take it to court if I have to." I smiled slightly. "Actually, Brenda, I already have a meeting with my lawyer tomorrow. You will be hearing from them soon." She stomped off, but not before yelling, "You will regret this, Jim. Nobody likes a difficult neighbor." Over the next few weeks, I documented everything, every conversation, every text, every interaction. I took daily photos of the construction site and the stop work order. I even installed security cameras covering the vacant lot after I noticed some suspicious activity at night. Looked like someone was trying to continue work despite the stop work order. My lawyer, Sarah Chen, was thorough and efficient. This is actually one of the more egregious cases of property encroachment I've seen. She told me during our first meeting she absolutely had no right to build on your property, and the lack of permits makes it even worse. We filed the lawsuit demanding the removal of the structure in compensation for damage to my property. Legal fees and additional damages for the stress and inconvenience too. Brenda's response? She countersued, claiming I had verbally agreed to the construction and was now trying to extort her. The day of our first court appearance, Brenda showed up in what looked like a brand new designer outfit, complete with pearls. I wore my regular business suit, and her lawyer looked expensive, but mine looked competent. That is when things got really interesting. So the court proceedings were honestly better than any legal drama I've ever watched on TV. Brenda's expensive lawyer tried to paint me as an unreasonable neighbor who was using a minor property dispute to extort money from a vulnerable, divorced woman. But Sarah, my lawyer, methodically dismantled their case piece by piece. First she presented the survey maps and property records showing clear documentation of my ownership. Then of course came the photos I had taken showing the progression of the unauthorized construction, but the real kicker was when Sarah started questioning Brenda about the contractor. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah began, "could you state the name of the contractor you hired for this project?" Brenda shifted uncomfortably. "It was Premier Construction Services." "And do you have any documentation of your agreement with them? Contracts, invoices?" I paid in cash to get a better rate." The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, leaned forward. "Are you telling this court that you have no written contract for a major construction project?" "Well, Your Honor, it was more of a verbal agreement." Sarah produced a document. "Your Honor, we have checked with the state licensing board, and there's no registered contractor under the name Premier Construction Services in our state." Brenda's face went pale. Her lawyer quickly requested a brief recess, which the judge granted. I could see them having an intense discussion in the hallway. When we returned, Brenda's story had suddenly evolved. Now she claimed that she had been scammed by an unlicensed contractor who assured her the property line was not an issue. Her lawyer tried to argue that this made her a victim too, and Sarah was ready for this. Mrs. Peterson, I have here security camera footage from my client's property showing that you are directing construction workers after the stop work order was posted already. Would you like to explain that? The footage clearly showed Brenda in her designer workout clothes gesturing and giving instructions to workers at night, well after the stop work order had been posted. I was just trying to protect my investment, Brenda stammered. By continuing illegal construction on property you don't even own after being served with a stop work order? Sarah asked. The judge had heard enough. Mrs. Peterson, she said, her voice stern, I find your actions not only illegal, but it shows a blatant disregard for property rights and city ordinances. Your countersuit is dismissed and I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The judge's final ruling was better than I could have hoped for. Brenda was ordered to remove all construction from my property within 30 days, pay for all demolition costs, restore my property to its original condition, pay my legal fees. Also, she had to pay additional damages for the stress and inconvenience and pay fines to the city for violating the stop work order. This all came to just over $47,000. Brenda burst into tears right there in the courtroom. But I cannot afford all that. I will have to sell my house. The judge was unmoved. Perhaps you should have considered that before building illegally on someone else's property. The aftermath was satisfying to watch. The demolition crew arrived exactly 1 week later. I made sure to be home that day, sitting on my front porch with a cup of coffee, documenting everything for my records. The sound of the partially built garage being torn down was surprisingly therapeutic. Brenda came out to watch too, still in her designer clothes of course, but looking significantly less put together than usual. I hope you're happy. She spat in my direction. You've ruined me. I took a sip of my coffee. No, Brenda, you did that all by yourself. The real karma came a few months later. Brenda tried to sell her house, but the incomplete garage foundation and the legal judgment against the property made it difficult. She had to drop her asking price 3 times before selling it at a significant loss. As for my vacant lot, well, sometimes good things come from bad situations. All the publicity from the case caught the attention of our local community center. We partnered up and that vacant lot is now becoming exactly what I had dreamed of, a community garden and educational space. We broke ground last week and watching the neighborhood's kids get excited about planting their first vegetables was worth all the drama. We did put up one small sign saying, "Welcome to Greenhaven Community Garden, established in 2024. No mention of Brenda or the garage incident, but everyone in the neighborhood knows the story. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and using your property exactly as you had planned. The new neighbors who bought Brenda's house are a lovely young couple who have already signed up for a garden plot. Apparently it's become something of a neighborhood legend. I just showed them the framed survey map in my office and suggested they always get proper permits for any construction projects. Last I heard, Brenda moved to a condo in another part of the town. I still have all the documentation filed away in my home office right next to the building inspector's report and the court judgment. Some might call it overkill to keep all those records, but hey, you never know when being too organized might save you from a neighbor with big plans for your property. Looking out at the garden now, watching tomatoes and peppers growing where the illegal garage once stood, I cannot help but feel satisfied. Sometimes standing your ground is not about being difficult, it's about protecting what is yours and ensuring it's used for something worthwhile. And if that ground happens to grow fresh vegetables for the neighborhood instead of housing someone's illegal garage, well, that is just a cherry tomato on top. And now we got an update to the story and it is titled 6 months later, the community garden thrives while Brenda's life continues to crumble. So it's been 6 months since the whole garage fiasco. And I thought I would share an update because things have gotten even more interesting. You know how they say karma comes back around? Well, grab a seat because this update is pretty satisfying. First, let me tell you about our community garden, Greenhaven. It's become the neighborhood's pride and joy. We've got 30 active plots now and there's a waiting list for more. The local elementary school even brings kids over twice a week for hands-on learning about growing food. Last week we harvested our first big crop of vegetables, and seeing everyone's faces light up as they collected their produce was incredible. But here's where it gets good. Remember Brenda? Well, her story didn't end with selling her house at a loss. About 2 months ago, I got served with another lawsuit. Apparently, she was not done trying to make my life difficult. Her new lawsuit claimed that the community garden was causing her emotional distress because it was a constant reminder of her financial hardship. She also tried to argue that the garden would attract undesirable elements to the neighborhood and that the vegetables growing there were causing her allergies even though she had moved across the town. I immediately called Sarah, my lawyer from the original case. When she saw the new lawsuit, she actually laughed. "This is what we call a frivolous lawsuit," Sarah explained. "She's just trying to harass you and it's gonna backfire spectacularly." Sarah then filed a motion to dismiss and also filed for something called vexatious litigant status against Brenda. She explained that this would prevent Brenda from filing further baseless lawsuits without court permission. The hearing was last week and it was even shorter than we expected. The judge, different from our first case but equally no nonsense, took one look at the paperwork and shook his head. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, "this court's time is valuable. You're claiming emotional distress from a community garden located miles away from your current residence?" Brenda, who was not wearing designer clothes anymore but still tried to maintain her appearance, attempted to explain. "Your Honor, every time I drive by and see those vegetables, I'm reminded of how I lost my home." "Mrs. Peterson," the judge interrupted, "you lost your home because you illegally built on someone else's property and then violated a stop work order. The current use of the property as a community garden is both legal and beneficial to the community." He not only dismissed her case, but granted the vexatious litigant status. And even better, he ordered her to pay my legal fees again. Another $5,000 she now owes me. But here's where karma really kicked in. So during the hearing, it came out that Brenda had been trying this same sort of thing with other people, and apparently she had filed 3 other lawsuits in the past 6 months against various people. Her former contractor, the real one finally surfaced, her divorce lawyer, and even her HOA at her new condo. The judge was not amused. "Mrs. Peterson, this pattern of behavior suggests that you're using the court system to harass people rather than seek justice. This stops now." After the hearing, Sarah told me something interesting. "You know the contractor Brenda tried to sue? He has been cooperating with the state licensing board investigation. It turns out that Brenda knew perfectly well that she was hiring unlicensed workers to save money. They even found text messages where she specifically asked them to work at night to avoid the building inspector. This information has now been forwarded to the city's legal department." Sarah says that Brenda might face additional fines or even criminal charges for knowingly violating building codes and endangering workers. But the best part? Remember that original $47,000 judgment? Brenda still has not paid at all. She has been making small monthly payments as ordered by the court, but now that this new judgment has been added, she is really feeling the pressure. Last week, I saw her Mercedes being repossessed from her condo parking lot. A neighbor told me that she's been trying to sell her designer handbags online. Meanwhile, Greenhaven Community Garden is flourishing. We just got a grant from the local Sustainability Council to add a small greenhouse for year-round growing. The funny thing is, the grant application was strengthened by all the publicity from Brenda's original case. The council loved the story of how a would-be illegal garage was transformed into a community space. We are also starting a program teaching local kids about growing their own food. Last Saturday, I watched 20 children plant their first seeds in the exact spot where Brenda's illegal garage once stood. One little girl looked up at me and said, "Mr. Jim, can we do this again next week?" That moment made all the legal hassle worth it. The new neighbors who bought Brenda's old house, Tom and Lisa, have become good friends. They've actually been documenting their garden's progress on social media, and our little project has gone somewhat viral locally. Several other neighborhoods are now planning similar community gardens. As for me though, I've learned some valuable lessons through all of this. Standing your ground does not make you the bad guy. Keeping meticulous records is not being obsessive, it's being prepared. And sometimes the best way to deal with entitled people is to let the legal system do its job. I still keep all the documentation from both cases in my office, right next to the framed survey map. But now they are joined by photos of smiling kids holding up their first homegrown vegetables, articles about the garden from our local paper, and the Sustainability Council's Grant Award letter. Last week, I ran into Brenda at the grocery store. She was using a coupon book and looked like she had seen better days. When she spotted me, she quickly turned around and went the other way. I guess she's finally learned that some battles are not worth fighting. And by the way, the garden is hosting its first harvest festival next month. We are expecting over 100 people, including the mayor and some local news crews. They want to feature the Greenhaven as an example of how communities can transform unused spaces into something valuable. Nobody's going to mention the illegal garage that almost was. We are focused on the future, not the past. Though I gotta admit, every time I walk past the thriving tomato plants growing exactly where Brenda tried to put her garage, I cannot help but smile. Sometimes the best revenge is not just living well, it is growing well too. And now guys, we have reached the end of the video. However, we will read one last short story that you don't want to miss. It's from r/malicious compliance and it is titled, "Need my uniform before you will give me my last check? No problem." So this is a story from my mom and my grandmother. They gave me permission to post. Quite a while ago, both my mom and my grandma worked for one of the local casinos. At the time, the casino had a 90-day trial and then you would get insurance. During the course of them working there during the 90-day trial, the casino switched their policy to 18-month trial before getting insurance. So they then proceeded to find reasons to fire all of their employees who are coming up on the 90-day so that they would not be grandfathered in. My mom knew this was coming because she saw a person after a person who had gone hired a little bit before her get fired for ridiculous reasons. So when she got called in the office the day after she had to go to the hospital for a severe allergic reaction, she knew what was coming. They marked it as a no-call, no-show because she started having a severe allergic reaction on shift and her EpiPen did not work. She walks into the office and she is informed that due to her no-call, no-show, she is being let go effective immediately. She then asked for her final check. They informed her that she would receive the check after she turned in her uniform. My mother proceeded to strip down to her underwear, bra, and drop the uniform on the supervisor's desk and demand her last check. She stood there in her underwear for 40 minutes while they tried to convince her to turn the uniform in at a later day. "Nope, you said I would get my check when I turned in my uniform. So there's my uniform, I want my check." Eventually they wrote out a check and she then walked out taking the long route through the casino, saying her goodbye to all the staff and regulars on her way out. So a couple days later when my grandma had her shift, she knew what to expect, because she was coming up on that same time frame. And yes, my grandma proceeded to do the exact same thing. My grandma walked through the crowded casino in her underwear. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you again tomorrow.